It's a great pleasure to introduce to you formally Tom Berlin. Whenever I'm in Tom's company, I feel more courageous. I feel more glad that I'm a pastor in the United Methodist Church, and I feel more confident in the future of our church. Tom is a Virginian raised in the apple country in the beautiful, beautiful mountains of Virginia. He went to Virginia Tech and Candler. He served churches in Virginia where he has distinguished himself. He's beloved in the Virginia Conference, has led their delegation to General Conference on the clergy side a number of times. I went to the website of his church to see a little bit and explore a little bit, and on his webpage, the staff all have their favorite Bible verse, and Tom's is Romans 1:17, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. And what's one of your favorite things? And I love this, being a beach person myself. He said, I love any beach, anytime. So Richard, Francis, Linda, we can fix you up here in North Carolina, can't we? It's a delight to have you, and we thank you for your patience with us as we change the time of your presentation, and we look forward to all that you'll share with us.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Well, it is so good to be with you, and I just want to compliment the band if they're still around. Wow, you guys, they're back here now. You all just terrific. And let me say to you and also to, how's my mic? Okay, we're still good. To you and also those that we'll hear soon, we not only need musicians like this in the church, we need them in the United Methodist Church. And so God bless you. You're a talented bunch, and I'm grateful to you tonight. I'm grateful to be in North Carolina. I love your state. I spend as much time as I can at the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and I've been doing that for years. My family spends the week of Thanksgiving here and down in the Outer Banks, and I spend a study week typically, and then my family will be here in July because that place is a little bit like home to us, and so even though we're not from your state, we sure do love coming here, and I'm just grateful. And I want to thank you for being here. Come on, who comes back? Right? I mean, you're unbelievable, you people. Would you turn to the person next to you and just look at them and say, you are unbelievable? That's right. Oh my goodness. I mean, rain and wind and nothing can keep you down, you people. So I just hope it's a blessing. Would you mind, could we just start with my time with a word of prayer? Would that be all right? Can we bow our heads? Lord, thank you for this time tonight, and I pray it'll be well used. I pray that you will speak to us. I pray that the words that have been prepared and the slides and all that will facilitate a message that you want someone to hear tonight. I pray that it'll be a word of encouragement and perhaps an answer to a question. And I pray that somebody will have a discovery tonight that they've been looking for. And so bless us with this time. You have brought together a group of very motivated learners, and I'm grateful for their presence as we are for yours. In Christ's name, amen. Hey, I love annual conference. I don't love it so much so I like going to 2 in a year, but this is a new experience. But I do love annual conference, and my life was changed one year at annual conference, and I've never, I really mean this, I'm not overstating it, my life has never quite been the same. I went to annual conference many years ago. I was younger then, and Bishop, I hate to admit it, but I left early. And I left, I'm not making this up, I left during the clergy health benefits report. You can understand that, can't you? I mean, you can understand the desire to leave right at that moment. But I did. It was the last day of conference for us, and I got up, and a friend and I walked out, and there were, in front of the Civic Center, there were 6 lanes of traffic, and we didn't even go to the crosswalk. That's how bad we wanted to get out. I mean, come on, this afternoon, weren't you feeling that? And so we just jumped. We went across the first 3 lanes. There's no problem. The second 3 lanes of traffic, there was a little island there in the middle. It looked to me like everything was good because the traffic was stopped. And so I very quickly, my friend didn't do this, but I quickly went out in front of 1 lane, 2nd lane, and when I stepped out into the 3rd lane, I took the step, and as I took the step, there was a Hyundai Excel traveling at 35 miles an hour that was just coming down the way, and as I stepped out in that lane of traffic, his front bumper clipped the back of my legs, and I went up onto his hood, and my head took out his windshield. Now, 35 miles an hour does not sound that fast, does it? When you're on the car, it's like, "Rah!" I mean, it's fast. It's fast. And I didn't lose consciousness the whole time. I didn't feel anything. But you know how they say that when you're having a near-death experience, everything slows down? That's true. And I remember hitting the thing and thinking, this is going to be okay. Like, this is going to be okay. And then the driver had an instinct that I think he couldn't have helped if he wanted to. He slammed on the brakes. And just at the moment that I thought this is going to be okay, I felt the car rapidly deaccelerating, and I had a second thought, which is, this is not going to be okay. My friend said I did 3 forward rolls into the street before I finally stopped. There was a woman on the side of the road. I, again, did not lose consciousness. This woman immediately started going, oh my gosh, Lord, did you, oh my gosh. And people started walking over helping her. They were like, oh, are you going to be okay? I'm laying there like, no, seriously, I think I just got hit by a car. I can't remember, but it was bad. So I eventually made my way to the curb. They called an ambulance. While I was waiting for the ambulance, a police officer came down. He was the guy that was actually in the crosswalk where I should have been. And he came down and he said, buddy, I got to tell you something. I've seen a lot of accidents. That was bad. That was bad. Like, you should be dead. Dead. And I said, thank you. And he said, really, that was really bad. And I said, well, it feels that way to me. And so as I was laying there, the ambulance eventually came, and they put me in the back of the ambulance. And it's funny when people find out you're a pastor, how they turn to religious talk. Other clergy, have you all noticed this? Isn't it so funny? So she's just talking to me about who are you and are you married, and she's giving some things to make sure I'm still coherent. I know what she's doing. But then she said, what's your vocation? I said, well, I'm a United Methodist pastor. And then she goes, well, then I'm sure this happened for a reason. Which is sort of like the worst form of Calvinism ever, right? And I looked at her and said, are you saying that God just hit me with a car? I said, I don't know. You're either saying something about God or about me. I don't know which. I said, I think if God wanted to get my attention, there are a lot of ways that could happen other than a car hit me. And she said, well, I didn't mean that. I said, well, what? I was cranky at this point. I said, well, what did you mean? Well, they got me to the hospital, and a friend of mine was with me and eventually put me in a car, and they released me, which was nice, and which proves that the hard head thing is correct. And I drove home, but here's the thing. Here's how it was life-changing. I saw the world differently. Let me tell you something. You almost lose your life. You have an accident that was close. That could have gone either way. The green in the grass was greener. The blue in the sky was bluer. The sun was brighter. And to this day, I can remember at the end of about a 4-hour drive, I can still picture what my wife, and we only had one daughter at that time. We've got 4 now, so it's been a long time ago. What my wife and my oldest daughter looked like standing in the driveway when we pulled in. And it's always that I've been so grateful for that near-death experience because it gave me a different way to look at the world. And in many ways, that stuck with me over the years. Now, what I would like to say at this point is I wish that a lot of United Methodist churches could get hit by a car, but it never comes out the way I want. Just doesn't. But can I tell you something? Our denomination right now is having a near-death experience. Now, we can admit that's true, or we can deny it, we can do whatever we want. It just is. And the question is, will that help us see things differently? Because we can either pull our hair out and say, oh, woe is us, and the patient's not going to make it, or we can say, maybe there's a different way to see things. Maybe God will use this moment to show us things that we've never seen before. And if that's true, that'll be the power of vision. God might use this time in our church's history to give us a vision of what the future could be. And maybe that'll change everything for us. That's kind of a decision we have to make. But I think that way of seeing things is what's so powerful. Now, the question might be, Tom, if my local church is going to see things differently, where should we start? I mean, how will we do that? How will we start seeing things differently? Well, can I suggest to you one place to start? Start with your 2 places simultaneously. The first, not even the first place, a place to start Because it's not like one is more important than the other. They're both equally important. So a place to start is with your pastor's vision. Your pastor's vision of the church. To the laity, I would say your pastor is the only one in your church who has had to convince a large committee of people that he or she has been called by God Almighty to enter into their vocation. You don't have anybody else in your church like that. You have never, before, when somebody raised their hand and said, hey, I'd like to join the church, you have never put them in front of a committee and said, now, prove to the committee beyond a doubt that you have a calling to be in our church. But we do that to our clergy, not once, but about 4 different times between district and conference committees in our ordination process. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, Tom, there's a very fine line between called to ministry and I hear voices from God. I know. That makes your clergy a little suspect. But they're the only one in the church. Just think about this for a minute. They're the only one that has had to come before the church and say, no, really, I'm called. I think God has asked me to enter into this vocation. But here's what I want to know. Do you know what your pastor's calling is? Because the thing about clergy is we're all different. We're a mixed bag. I mean, you just don't know what you're going to get when you get a pastor. Some of us have a deep calling to issues of social justice, while others are just natural-born evangelists. Some of us love camping ministry and retreats. Others like urban settings. Some people do really well with young families, while others are over here, they love singles. Some minister to the elderly with compassion and grace, while others say, you know what, I have a heart for military families. They're just all sorts of callings. And so my question is this: how many of you have ever heard your pastor talk about the particular vision of ministry to which she or he was called? Do you know that? Hey, I'm just laity. How many of you have ever asked that question? Tell me about your calling. Would you raise your hand if you've asked that question? Keep your hands up. Keep your hands way up. Now look around the room and I want you to notice something. There are a handful of hands that are up. I want to suggest to us that if we want a vision, one of the places we're going to have to look is to the calling that our clergy say they have. And so what would we want to know? Well, I think we'd want to know, what are 2 or 3 key components of their calling? What are 2 or 3 key components? And what's the particular fruit God has asked you or called you to produce? I discovered this in myself years ago. I had a superintendent who called me and said, you know what, I think you're going to be moving this year, and I just want you to know that that's where we are. And I said, all right, and we talked about it. And I finally, right as he hung up the phone, I said, Jack, there's just one last thing. And he said, what? I said, Jack, here's something I want you to really know about me. Don't send me to a church that doesn't want to grow numerically. Said, you and I both know there are churches out there that when they begin to grow numerically, the congregation just gets almost unhappy for a number of reasons. Don't send me to one of those churches because I can do fine here. Second thing, I said, Jack, send me someplace where people want to go deeper and grow in their faith in a deeper level. And I said, here's one more thing. And he's like, well, I think 2's enough. I said, no, one more thing. Don't send me to a church that doesn't want to engage the poor. And you know what, suddenly? I knew the answer to that first question. What are the 2 or 3 things that God's called you to? Those are my 3 things. I don't apologize to anyone for those 3 things because I don't think I came up with them. I think they're a part of the calling that God placed in my life when I was called to the ordained ministry, and I have duly gone before all the representative bodies of the church, and I have convinced them of that, and so why would I ever squelch the calling that God has placed within me? Now, here's the thing. If you don't know that about your pastor, you're never going to understand why they spend their time and energy in some places and not in others. See, if you don't know that about your pastor, you're going to start asking. My congregation has done this to me. I had a group of people that came to me some time ago in the church, years ago. I've been in the same, at Flores, I've been there 16 years next week. I will complete 16 years of ministry next week. That's long. Would you not agree it's a long time? Some people left just because they thought, shoot, we got to leave because he never will. right? A lot of them have stayed, though, which has been great. I had a group of people that came to me a long time ago in this church, and they said, Tom, it seems like you spend a lot of time thinking about how we're going to bring new people into the life of this church. And what bothered them, they said, what we think you need to be worried about the people that are already here. And I said, well, in what way are the people already here neglected? Are they not being visited in the hospital? Oh, no, they've been visited in the hospital. Are they not being visited in their home? No, we do visit their home. We just think you make a lot out of that. And I said, oh, that's my calling. What's your pastor's calling? Pastors, here's the second place to look for that vision. It's in the story of your church. Because you know what? You received a calling, which you've told other people about, and the board has agreed, and the bishops laid their hands on you, and so on. But listen, your church was in existence for the vast majority of us. I know there are a couple of people, there may be some new church planners. I bet they're not. New church planners, they never come back for an evening session that's not planned. They're just not. They're out hanging out. Any new church planners here? Oh, come on. Did you really? You came back? I feel like 4 times blessed. Your personality profile does not fit that activity. And so I feel honored. So most of us, though, just see again, only about 4 or 5 hands went up. Most of the clergy that are in this room, they've been appointed to establish congregations that are measured in decades and even centuries. And here's what I know about my church. I'm just the latest one that showed up. 1891 is down here. 2013 is right here. And what I know is I'm here for a period of time. This is not my church. This is not my anything. I'm not writing the history. I am a portion of this church's history as far as a pastor can be. But the real long-term things that happen, they're all behind me. And there has been layperson after layperson and pastor after pastor that makes up that history. And guess what? God's been at work the whole time. Amen? Hey, the Lord didn't show up when Tom Berlin walked in. Can you believe that? Yeah, some of you are like, seriously, I can believe that. Yeah, so here's the deal. Pastors, do you know the story of your church? Because what I want to suggest to you is, God put it in the heart, especially of the founders of that church, to do something in that community that was unique. The Holy Spirit organized those people, got those people together, and then the Holy Spirit's been working generation after generation. Hey, sometimes better than others, amen? Because we have the capacity to block the will of the Holy Spirit. We have the free will to be in concert with the Spirit or to work against the Spirit, even in ways that are unconscious to us. But on the whole, we can probably say that God's been at work in the life of that church. And even though your church is going to look more like that, can you all see that? Where is it? Oh, it's over there. Good. Your church is going to look more like those 2 churches there. Maybe it's out in the country. Maybe it's in an urban place. But it's going to be an older congregation. And sometimes what we wonder, if you go out in the U.S. to the teaching churches, the large teaching churches of any denomination, here's what you're going to find in most of them. Most of them went from 0 to 5,000 fairly rapidly. Some have gone to 10, even 15,000 members, which is just amazing, right? And here's what you're going to find about most of those teaching churches. The founding pastor is still at the helm of that church. Now, why? Why do I know that's true? Because here's the thing. When the founding pastor is still the pastor at the church, there is a tremendous alignment between the vision of the pastor and the vision of the church. And that alignment of vision means that they make decisions faster, they're more nimble, and they're all going after the same thing at the same time. Can you imagine the power that would be vested in your congregation if everybody was on the same page, going after the same thing at the same time? And the pastor and the congregation were united, and every time something good happened, everybody joined hands and said, wow, isn't God wonderful? Wouldn't that be exciting? That's the key reason those churches are doing what they're doing. And so I like to go hang around at those churches because most of them have fantastic practices that the rest of us can learn from. But here's what I understand. If I want to have that same alignment as a pastor, I've got to know the past calling of the church that I serve. I've got to know what that past calling is. When I moved to Florida 16 years ago, I had to unearth the story of that church. And that wasn't that easy. Because what it meant is I had to go around to my oldest members and I had to ask them this question: what are some of the key values or the key stories from the congregation's past? You know, one of my favorite questions was, tell me about some of your favorite pastors who have served here and why you consider them your favorite. Because you know what, lay people have their favorite pastors. Have you noticed that? My goodness, my best day at Flourish United Methodist Church is when some of the older members of our congregation, you got to go to the old people for this, by the way. The new people, they're no good at this at all. You got to go to those old people. They had these old memories. And I went to these old people and she said, oh, Reverend Light was my favorite pastor. I said, tell me more about Reverend Light. And she talked on and on about Reverend Light. And I went to a family reunion, and my uncle, whose name is John Light, said to me, Floris, you know, you have a distant cousin who once served Flourish United Methodist Church. Oh, I said, Uncle John, you got to show me the tree. Show me the family tree that gets me there. And he wrote down that family tree, and you better believe it, I took it right to the old ladies. And I said, hey, come on now. You see this? And I'm not joking. She looked right at me and she goes, I'm so glad you're here. Hey, what brings particular joy to your congregation? See, churches, you can bring up almost anything in church and somebody will get excited. But what makes everybody excited? And listen, lay people know this. Churches are as unique as clergy. Clergy, you know that. You've been appointed different places. Every church I've served has been unique. Every church has been different in different ways. And so one of the things I discovered is if I could learn the church's story, if I could be a sociologist and an anthropologist and a historian, then eventually I would learn things that would really, really help me. And so I just learned the story. And once I learned the story, I told the story. You know, Flourish United Methodist Church was founded in 1891. It was founded by a group of people who desired to bring the Methodist way, a different way of doing Christianity into their community. It wasn't present before. There was no United Methodist Church there. They were dairy farmers, most of them. These dairy farms have been passed through generation to generation from the 1800s on up to the 1900s. Most of them were by the same families, and this church had a unique ability to not only care for the people within it, but to reach out to the community. When there were people in need in the community, often Floris was the church that said, you know what, we can do something to help. They cared for one another. They loved one another so much that one time there was an older lady in this church, an older woman in this church, and she was a widow and she had no children, and she went to the hospital. And when she got to the hospital, her situation was such that the doctor said, hey, you are not going to be able to live alone anymore. You've got to live in some kind of a care situation. But this was back in the 1950s, and there was no place that she could go right then. And so somebody in the church heard about this, and a family in that church brought her into their home and cared for her like she was a grandmother until she died about 10 years later. That's the kind of church I serve. We love each other, and we love our community. Floris has always been the center of its community. During World War II, it's where they did the scrap metal drives. It's where the graduation from Floris High School was held when there was a Floris High School. It was the place where 4-H was held. It was a place of community service. That's who we are. Now, do you hear what I'm doing? I'm not just telling you the story of the church. I'm telling you the values of my church. And that's not anything I created. I wasn't there during World War II. I wasn't there when the nice woman was taken into somebody's home. None of that's my fault. You can't blame any of that on me. Okay? But that's what the old ladies taught me. And thank goodness I asked as soon as I got there, because some of them were in their 90s and they passed away a few years after I arrived. But they gave me the story. And so what I do is I tell the story over and over, and the story has its own power to show us where we're going. Does this make sense? What happened in the past has the power to show you where you're headed in the future. And so what I just call that the creation story of the church. And the creation story of the church has tremendous power. And here's what it has to be. It has to be true. You can't make stuff up. Flourish United Methodist Church, when they founded it, they wanted it to be the center of the community so that Christ could be at the center of the community's life. They founded the church because they wanted the church to be at the center of the community so that Christ could be at the center of the community's life. Now, I'm the one who wrote that line. But I wrote it after I listened very carefully to all these people tell me about the church. And then I took that line and I took it to every single one of my experts and I said to them, is this true? And they said to me, that's true. That's fair. I said, listen, I'm going to start saying this, so I need to know if it's true. And let me tell you something. Once Margaret tells you it's true, ain't nobody going to argue with that. Right? So it has to be true. It also has to honor the past, but it also has to envision the future. And I'm going to tell you how it does that in a second. And it has to state our core values, and it has to, yes, bring hope. Because listen, friends, in the history of the church I served, there were decades when there was no infant baptism. There were decades when there was no profession of faith. There were decades when people looked at each other and went, I don't know if we're going to make it for another 5 years. Today in this church, in that church, I just asked somebody in the church this yesterday to make sure I had the right number. I said, what's our average worship attendance January through May? She said 1,261 people. See, now, it's not about being big or being small or being anything else. What's exciting to me is that what people did in 1891 is still being honored in 2013. But can I tell you something? As a percentage of the population, they were doing better than we are right now. They were affecting the community more deeply than we are right. More deeply, is that a word? Can you say that? I don't know. You understand what I'm saying? So it's got to bring hope, and I think that ours does. Now, why am I telling you all this? These two stories. Well, on the left is that circle is the pastor's calling, and on the right is the congregation's calling, and the overlap of that diagram is your sweet spot. Because where the calling of the pastor and the calling of the church line up, that's where the place of joy is found. That's where the excitement is found. That's where the energy is found. That's where everybody's excited. You hardly ever argue in the center spot. You know where you argue is on the sides. Why? Because the pastor's over here going saying, why aren't you all interested in what I'm interested in? And the congregation on the side is going, why aren't you doing what we say you should do? But in the center, and here's the thing, many United Methodist churches have these two orbits that don't intersect, in part because we don't know each other. And where we don't know each other, can I say something out loud? Where we don't know each other, we don't love each other. And remember what Jesus' great prayer was for the church. Final week of his life, one of the final prayers he says is, may they have unity. May they be one as we are one. And he's speaking about the community of the Holy Trinity, for goodness sakes. And that's what he longs for. So the question might be, do we know each other's stories? Now, I want to give you an example of how this works in our life and the power of vision in our church. I want you to imagine a church that has a vision. And the vision was just this. It was, one portion of our vision was, how can we minister to children in poverty? I don't know if you've ever heard about that in the United Methodist Church. But we obviously got that from the denomination. And you know what, can I tell you something? A lot of the things that you get from the denomination are excellent. I know there's a lot of busting on the denomination this, and my goodness, just glean the good stuff and run with it, right? And so one of the initiatives that the bishops gave us years ago was a focus on children in poverty and children in poverty. In many ways, we still do this today. And so we said, how can we focus on children in poverty in a way that really matters? And we didn't know the answer to that, so we called up the Department of Social Services in Fairfax County, and they very gratefully said, listen, if you're willing to help, we're willing to come. And the social worker, she rolled out this big map. They had done a community needs assessment. She said, do you want to do something for children in poverty? I said, yes, we do. And a group of us were around the map, and she said, here's your church right here. And I said, yes, it is. And she said, right here, and the distance was a mile. She said, right here is an elementary school that has the second highest free and reduced lunch population in the county. Can I just confess something to you? I had never heard of this school before, and I had lived in the community for 3 years. I mean, I was so convicted. I was so convicted. Why? Because it was on the other side of the toll road, and it was tucked up back in there, and I had maybe 2 members that went to that school, which tells you something about my church and its demographics. Well, we started looking at that, and I said, a mile away, this is like a huge opportunity. So we went down to the principal. We said, hey, we'd like to offer ourselves and maybe have a community partnership. I know you do business partnerships. Can we have one with the church? And the principal's like, we're not letting you Christian people in here because we don't know what that'll turn. I mean, she was very nice, but you could read the concern all over her face. And as God's grace would have it, her assistant principal was the wife of a United Methodist pastor. And the assistant principal came into her office and said, hey, you can trust people. They won't do any evangelism. They're terrible at that. I mean, even if they want to, they'll goof it up. They won't. They're too timid. You don't need to worry about that. When they say Jesus, they sputter, and it just doesn't. So don't worry about that. No, it wasn't quite that bad. But she convinced the principal we'd be okay. So we started doing things. And because when we form partnerships, listen, God may give us the vision, but the partner gets to establish strategy. I'm going to have a slide on that later. But the partner is, because why? The principal of the elementary school is the expert. She is the one who knows things. So she said, I said, what can we do? And she goes, well, we don't have many of our parents, because many of the parents of this school are first-generation Americans. And they don't necessarily speak English, and they're working 2 to 3 jobs. And there's not much of a PTA here. And could you all do a teacher appreciation thing? I had a Bible study of about 50 women, and we just sicked them on that. I mean, those women, they did this teacher appreciation thing for these teachers, and the very first year they did it, the teachers were just walking higher and stepping, they just smiling, and finally. And then she said, we had some teenagers, some students in our student ministry. They said, you know what, could we do an after-school club? We had these teenagers. They said, we want to do a Lego club, and somebody else had another club they did. So some of our students went in there, and they started working together to run clubs. And then the principal came and said, a lot of our parents, they come from they come from countries that are closer to the equator, and they don't have cold weather clothing, apparel. Their kids don't necessarily have this. So could you all do like a yard sale? And so we did this very inexpensive yard sale, because there's a dignity to buying things. And so people came in, and then we took all the money and we gave it to the principal. And every time she had a kid that had no gloves, no hat, or no shoes, she now had a fund of money to buy those with. And then we came in and did the classroom assistant. She said, could you put some people in my classrooms and help? And so all this went on and on. And then one day we went out to lunch. This was just about 3 years ago. We went out to lunch, 4 years ago. And new principal by this time, but she was all over it. And sitting there with her and somebody else. And she said, I said, Judy, what else can we do for you? Because sometimes that list you just saw, some of those things we don't do anymore. Because when the principal says we don't need that anymore, we say, okay, we're not doing that. And some people go, oh, but we've always, no. She says, no. But I said, what do you need? And she goes, oh, I just wouldn't ask you for anything. You've done so much already. And I looked at her and said, Judy, you are a bad asker. That's with a K. You are a terrible, bad asker. And she said, what do you mean? I said, look, when somebody comes to you and says, is there anything I can do for you? Your job before that happens is to know exactly what you're going to say. So I'm going to give you 24 hours. And in 24 hours, I want you to call me up and say, Tom, here's what we need. And within 1 minute, she said, all right, fine. Are you serious? And I said, yes, I'm serious. She said, I need summer school. Summer school? She said, the county just canceled funding for my summer school. She said, 3 things are bad about that. Number 1, that's when the gangs recruit our kids, and that starts in the 3rd grade. Number 2, my kids are going to be undernourished because they depend on free breakfast and lunch. Number 3, they're going to lose ground academically because many of them are not in homes where somebody's saying, do the math packet and let's go to the library. And she goes, here's what I'm going to need. I'm going to need you to pay for the buses. I'm going to need you to pay for the meals the state will give us, but she said, I need you to have volunteers to prepare the food. I need you to have a certified teacher in every single classroom, and I need you to pay for the staff person that will be the liaison between Hutchinson and your church. And I need you to have volunteers to run the playground and volunteers to do maybe some art projects would be really nice. You getting the idea? And I said, Judy, you have just grown in your ability considerably. And I said, Judy, what do you think that's going to cost? And she did call me back a day later on that, and it was over $10,000. And I don't know about you, but where I live, $10,000 is what I call a big pile of money. right? And I was like, I don't think, and Jake, who heads this up, the guy on our staff who heads this up, he just looked at me and said, Tom, come on, we got to do this. And I put out in my e-note, my weekly e-note, what we were going to do. And within an hour, a woman emailed me. And she said, you won't believe what happened. And I saw her later, and she said, Tom, when your e-note came out, I was typing a proposal to you. And the proposal was to do summer school at Hutchison Elementary with all the same components. And she said, if you'll let me, I'll be the director. And she was a certified teacher. And then people heard of the need, and people that weren't even in our church, people in our church reached out to their friends who were retired teachers or teachers that weren't working right now because of family or whatever, and they said, hey, could you give 2 weeks? Could you give 4? And we did 4 weeks. And it included, this is all the other stuff we did. So, I missed all this good stuff we were doing. Well, too bad for that. Okay. Oh, shoot. Well, okay, let me just show you this slide real fast, and then I'll gloat for a minute. Okay, why did this work so well? On the left is my list, and on the right is the church's list. I've got a thing about kids in need. I don't know why, but when I hear a child is underserved, something gets in me that is not compassion. It's like, we are going to do this. Right? And people in my church are like, get out of his way. Here he goes again, But guess what? People in my church feel the same way about children. And in the history of our church, in the past, before I ever got there, they had already made tremendous decisions around children and children's ministry. Second overlap, poverty. Church had a history of caring. There was a time when they took up a collection. They did a fundraiser for the St. Andrew Society, which is a gleaning network, and they were going to send it to the St. Andrew Society, but at the same month, they couldn't pay the power bill. And they can remember a meeting, this is long before I got there, they can remember a meeting where they had to vote on whether they would take the money and pay the power bill or take the money and give it to the St. Andrew Society, and they voted that night to give it to the St. Andrew Society, and they said, let them turn off the lights. Shame on us if we don't care for the poor. You see, hey, come on, God did that before Tom Berlin ever showed up. But you see how that vision drives you to your future? Now, I remind them about that a lot. I grew up going to public schools. I think Christians ought to be the leaven and the loaf of public schools. Frankly, I don't understand why Christians are retreating from public schools. What are we retreating from? Help me understand what we're retreating from. Those evil people out in the American population, these are our neighbors. This is our community. I feel strongly about that. I think public education is one of the highest markers of a democratic society. I think it's one of the finest expressions of being an American. I just think it's awesome. That and libraries, which is another whole sermon. Where you just walk in and get a book. I mean, goodness, they just give you a card, you walk out. It's like stealing without the fun. Right? Okay, so my congregation, they mostly went to public school, and my congregation highly values education. Probably one of the most educated group of people I've ever been around. They exceed my education. And so all of these things, notice the lineup. See what I'm describing? I'm describing the two places where the circles intersect. Let me ask you something. Where do the circles intersect in your church with your pastor? Because when we did that thing, there's summer school. Yes, it was K through third grade. You know why third grade's so important? The former governor of Virginia, Tim Kaine, was at a meeting in the church that I served with a group of clergy. He was selling preschool, education for younger, 3, 4-year-olds, whatever that's called, when I have my notes. He said one of the ways they know how to build, how many prisons to build in the future, how many rooms they'll need in a prison, is you look at what the third grade literacy rate is today. And if you know what the literacy rate is of third graders today, that is one factor that is used to figure out how many prisons you'll need in the future. Everybody hearing me? You know what that means? You teach a child to read by the third grade, you disproportionately change their life. 4 weeks in the summer. It took us 140 volunteers. We fed them 2 meals a day. It was fantastic. This is Doug, who's in our church. He's a science teacher at a very good private school right next to the National Cathedral, but in the summer, he works at Camp Hutchison. This is Sarah, a college student. Sarah was there working each week, and now she's at an internship this summer. She's administering the entire program along with another college student at our church. They're doing all the training. This is a young man who's playing basketball. He's in high school. This is a girl who's in middle school, and behind her in the James Madison University is another college student. You know the power of this? It was intergenerational, and our church did it as a family. We did it together, and we just claimed a victory. Now, you have to ask, what are we trying to accomplish? What I'm trying to accomplish as a pastor is I'm trying to find a sense of God's vision. It's not Tom's vision. It's not Floris's vision. It's God's vision for our church, but I believe that there is a sweet spot where all that intersects. I believe there is a loving relationship where all things are possible, and so that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to live into. Now, the question becomes then, how do you make the vision a reality? And here's what I want to say about that. If you want to make a vision a reality, there are three groups of people that have to be on board. The first is your governing board. So, friends, can I tell you something? If you're on your church council, raise your hand if you're on your church council or on your administrative board, whatever it's called. Most of you are. Hey, friends, can I tell you something? You are incredibly important. Hug yourself. Because you're really important in your church. You're the difference between something like that happening and a group of people sitting around saying, we can't. And you don't have to be from a large congregation to do things like this. I've got a friend in Nashville. She's a school principal in a very low-income area. And I said, Stephanie, who's helping you? And she said, you know who my all-stars are? And I said, who? She said, there's a little Methodist church right down the street. They've got about 50 people on Sunday morning. And they give us backpack meals, they give us school supplies, and they are opening up an after-school program for my kids 1 day a week. Free. Don't tell me what you can't do. Don't tell me what you can't do. Our denomination has way too much I can'ts. The church staff has to be on board with the vision. Friends, let me tell you something. I don't care if you've got a part-time receptionist and that's your total staff other than the pastor. That person has to be on board with the vision. You may come from a larger multi-staff church. Has several staff, 4 or 5 people, maybe walking around your building. If they are paid by the church, they are not allowed to create their own kingdom, live in their own silo, or criticize the body of Christ. That is not allowed. The people that play on guitars have to play nice with the people who play on organs. Where I live. If they don't, somebody gets fired. Why? No one gets fired. We release you to God's future. We release you to God's future. I know you're not fired. I'm releasing. I heard that from somebody else, but I love that line. But listen, why? Because it's not about allegiance to me. It's not about allegiance to the church. It is about allegiance to the vision we've agreed on. And if you can't have allegiance to that vision, you owe it to yourself to work somewhere else. Or go somewhere else. You just owe it to yourself. Find the vision that God's calling you to. I'm all for it. And finally, the congregation. But of the 3 groups, that congregation is the hardest bunch to turn, which is why the first 2 have to be on board. Now, the governing board, let me talk about them for a minute. They have to have a common understanding of the church's vision at any given time. And so we spend a lot of time. Friends, I've had church council meetings that lasted until 11 o'clock at night, and then we tabled what we were talking about. And we came back to it a month later. Why do we do things like that? Because we believe that until we are together, whatever we're talking about is not ready. Now, you can't do that at an annual conference level, but at a local church level, you certainly can get there with the 12 people that serve on our governing board. Common statement of initiatives. We create a common statement of initiatives that are shared with the congregation every year. This is what we're going after this year. They're listed, they're clear. We have a time when people can come, they can ask questions, they can send me questions through email, they can talk to our church council chair. He puts a report in there every single month about what's happening with the church council, and then we have progress reports on those initiatives. We come back each month and say, well, how's this going? How's this going? Progress, progress, progress. And if something is not progressing, we just have a simple question. Why? What's getting in your way? What resource do you need? But listen, a lot of churches don't set the initiatives, don't check on the progress, and then wonder, why is nothing happening? And so if you want vision to become a reality, you have to wade into these things. Now, the church council, I talked about how important they were. And I'd like you to see this picture that I'm showing you. If we can put that up on every screen. Oh, you're good. Thank you. Now, this is the underside of a ship. So it's the hull of the ship towards the back. Many of you have heard this illustration probably before, but I think it's worth repeating. That's the propeller. That large gray object is a propeller. Now, as a ship goes through the water, especially a large ship, think like aircraft carrier, tanker ship, something like that, imagine the force of the water that's cutting across the rudder at any given time. I mean, that's got to be just quite a force that's blowing through. And so the physics of this is that if that force is coming across the rudder wants to remain absolutely straight. Because if it goes this way or if it goes this way, the force is pushing on the rudder, and the rudder naturally wants to default to a straight line. And so you can imagine the force it takes to turn the blue rudder, that whole large rudder. So what the engineers have figured out, and this is true on ships and it's true on airplanes, is they have built something called the trim tab. And the trim tab is portrayed in yellow here. The trim tab is a small piece of the rudder on the outside edge, which when the navigator turns the wheel, or whatever that person's called, when they turn the wheel, it doesn't move the whole rudder at once. The first thing that moves is the trim tab. And the physics is such that once that moves, it becomes exponentially easier for the rudder to be moved as a whole. Now, I hope I explained that right. I got some nodding heads of people that look smart, so I'm going to go with that. Now, here's the deal. Your church council, do you know what you are? You are the trim tab of your church. That's who you are. Clergy, you are a part of the trim tab of your church. And friends, until you are working in concert, the rudder won't shift well, and if the rudder doesn't shift well, the ship is never, ever going to turn. So if you want to make vision a reality, community, it's not a nice thing and a biblical thing. It's a required thing. And can I tell you something? If right now you're sitting and you're saying, I don't like the church I serve. I don't really care for the pastor I've got. You're never going to have God's vision in your church. Because you can't turn the ship if the trim tab is not all together. But here's the beauty of it. Even under the worst of circumstances, under the hardest of conditions, if the pastor and the lay people are together, by the grace of God, miracles can happen. It's just amazing what God can do with a group of people that have learned to respect each other and to love each other. Some of the lady heard me say this yesterday. Hey, can I tell you something? I'm not 100% of the pastor my church has want. I've never been 100% of what anybody wants. I'm about 80% of what most people want. I'm about 50 for many. Can I say something about the church I serve? Even after all these years, they're not 100% of what I want. They're about 80%. And we live in the blessedness of the 80%. We know that we're never going to have our circles fully aligned. We're okay with that. In fact, there's some things I admire about the things I don't have that they do. And there's some things that they admire about me that maybe they don't have. But you know what? We live in a community of love, and that has been a powerful combination because God can work in the community of love. And I want to ask you something. How's that going in your church? Because if it's going well, don't worry about how bad the budget is. If that's going well, don't worry about the fact that nobody's new is moving into your community. If that's going well, don't worry about the resources that aren't there right now. If you can live in a community of love and find your vision, the Spirit will supply. And tomorrow, I'll tell you about a couple stories that have been true in our life that I could have never told you were going to happen. Build systems for fruitfulness. Communicate. Have conversations about what's happening in life of the church. Make commitments. What do I mean when I say communicate? Today, this afternoon, an e-note went out from me. I write one every single week. I actually only write the first paragraph. I've got some staff and volunteers who write the rest of it, and then I put it in my own words. I learned this from Adam Hamilton, his e-note. He's got the best one in the country probably. So if you want to know how to do an e-note, you can check mine out, but check Adam Hamilton's because he is the pro. You know what? It's been the best communication device that we found at Flourish recently. It has the highest open rate, and it has the highest read-through rate. It's just been remarkable
how people will actually read it, and it's about a page long. If you printed it, it'd be about a page long. For instance, I told them last week that I would be here this week. Why? Because on Sunday I got off a plane from Sierra Leone, Africa, being with college students for 2 weeks there, and then I was coming here, and I think it would be fair for people in my church to say, when's he ever at home? When's he ever serving our church? But what I said to them is, I'll be down at the North Carolina Conference speaking. Would you please pray for the North Carolina Conference? And right now there are people in my church praying for you. And you know what? Then we're doing something together because we communicated. The blog, while I was in Sierra Leone, I was there for 12 days in country. I wrote a blog page 9 of those days. Why? Because I'm trying to figure out how to keep my church connected to that ministry. And so I go, I write about it, they read the blog, and suddenly they feel like it's our ministry, which it is. But how many of them are going to be able to get on an airplane and fly to Sierra Leone, Africa? So we do a lot. We do things with social media, which I personally don't like, but is a necessity of this time. I would rather not have a Facebook page. But pastors, a Facebook page is a very easy way to communicate with people. And the bulletin. God bless the bulletin. It's still around. It's still important, you know? It still works. Conversations. I use sermon series and the Christian year each year to raise up certain pieces of our vision. And during Lent, we challenge people to discipleship. We create our own curriculum. We've got a website called 6 Blocks, and we've got some curriculum there that we've used in the past. And that's been very helpful to challenge people. I have a lot of people in my church that are former Roman Catholics, and in Lent, they love guilt. I don't know why, but they just do. They're all like, it's Lent. I feel bad. I don't know why. I'm like, well, if you feel bad, then you have to join a small group for 6 weeks. And then they're like, but I gave up chocolate. I'm going, well, it's because you're a wimp. Our Lord Jesus Christ died on a cross, and you gave up chocolate? Are you kidding me? I mean, are you serious about that? I'm like, you're going to sit for 6 weeks and you're going to read the Bible. That's what and they're like, okay. And then some of them, because they did that for 6 weeks, then they jump back in the fall and they join a small group for a year at a time. But the reason is we had a conversation about it, about why it was important. We use the Christian year that way. We make commitments. And friends, I want to tell you something. If you're going to have a church that has vision, you're going to have to call people to commitment all the time and never flinch and never back down and never apologize. Not when I'm calling you to help children in our community. I'm not going to apologize. Not when I'm asking you to give money to God's kingdom. I'm not apologizing for that. I don't apologize for these things. When I mess up, I'll apologize. When I do something wrong or say something wrong, I'll apologize. But I don't apologize for things of the kingdom. And I will never apologize for asking people to be committed to Jesus Christ. Thank you. Hey, you know what I found? I heard this from somebody else. You choose who you lose. You choose who you lose. I can either lose the people who complain every time I call for a commitment, or I can lose the people that want a commitment called for. Who would you rather lose? And I want to tell you, when the ones that complain every time you call for a commitment walk out, you know what I play in my head? Oh, happy day. I mean, I'm serious. When I was younger, I was like, oh, somebody doesn't like me. What am I going to do? I lost that a long time ago. Why? Because the commitments are what make the vision come true. Make it more than a dream, more than a phrase, more than a catch line. The commitment is where people's lives change. And the reason all that's important, friends, is that when we do something like that elementary school thing I was talking about, it's not just the kids' lives that are changing. You know whose life is changing? Ours. Because Christ said, whenever you do things in my name, you'll meet me. That's my job. That's your job. You're a leader in your church. Hey, let me just close by saying this. You have no idea how important your church is. You just don't know. You may have forgotten, and I just want to remind you. Some of you, your church has been in the community longer than any other nonprofit organization. You've been in that place. You have that identity. And you know what? There are people that are depending on you to bless them and to help them in their time of need. And you've got to figure out how to do that properly in your community and have to do it with integrity in your community. But can I just say something? Get off the sideline acting like you're not important. Claim your birthright as children of God, because that's what you are. And just step out in faith and say, God, what's the vision? And collect your pastor and just say, hey, pastor, Why did you get into this? And pastors, say to your church, tell me what's happened, because once you know that, you're going to see it. You're going to see where God's taking you. Amen? Amen. So let me see what time it is a second. Hey, love it. We've got like 7 minutes. Do you want to come up here? Do you want to take any questions? Is that okay, Bishop? Okay, hey, do y'all have any questions? Love it. Now we're going to do like 30 minutes of this, but we had a little time change today, and so do you all have any questions for Love It or me? He's hesitant to come up, but he will. And he's really smart. Any questions? Yes, in the back.
How do you get people to take that chance, make that commitment? How do you get them to leave their comfortable spot?
Okay, she's saying, how do you get people to leave their comfort zone and take the chance and make the commitment? How do you do that? I'm the first one that's going to take it. I don't ever ask you to go where I'm not going. So I use we a lot. And then part of what you have to do is, pastors and key lay people together, you have to share a common understanding of what we're doing and its importance, and it's the importance of it. See, when we talked about this Camp Hutchison thing, we didn't talk about, hey, let's go do summer school. We said, if you want to change a child's life, you help them learn to read by the 3rd grade. We said, hey, the principal says that children are going to be undernourished in our community if we don't do the summer school thing. We said, hey, it's really important that we do this because a lot of these kids aren't supervised in the summer, and it's not their parents' fault, it's not neglect, it's just they're working. And there's gang recruiting. Well, if you say no to that, you're just a bad person. I mean, you see what I'm saying? Like what are you going to do? You're like, I'm against it. Right? Nobody's first. So the comfort zone thing quite often expresses itself as, I'm against it. Well, who's going to be against helping kids, right? I mean, listen, in my community, we've got a lot of issues around immigration. A lot of people don't feel the same way about immigration. You may have heard that in America. But what's happened is we've interacted with our community so much that we don't even talk about that anymore because we actually know the names of people. Through our English second language program, through Hutchison, through about 10 other ways. We have a Spanish-speaking worship service on Saturday nights. We know people's names. That changes everything. Why? Because of the love of community. So once you get all that going, then the comfort zone thing gets a lot easier. Yeah. But you've got to have a lot of excitement. Whoever's pitching it, you got to be excited. What else? Any other questions? Yes. Yes.
And we went to seminary together. He's a good friend, but he has such a history there. And I mentioned at my introductory visit that I would never do anything to, discredit any of his works. And people actually openly began to weep. And I've heard the terror stories of, being the sacrificial lamb who goes for 2 years and then they find somebody they like. How do you support where that person has come from and not diminish anything they've done?
So the question is, he says he's following somebody that's been there for 14 years, right? And he said, how do we work in such a way that we don't diminish anything they've done, and we just say, I celebrate that I'm following this person, and can I tell you something? You've answered your own question. That's how you do it. Anytime anybody walks up to me and says anything about a pastor, when they say something negative, I say, you know what? I'm sure that was a difficult time in the life of this church. I'm glad that God has worked that out. And that's all I say. And when they say something good, I let them talk about it for about an hour. I'm dead serious. We just talk and talk and talk. We've got a choir here. Can I take one last question? There's a guy in the back that's had a paddle up for a while. And the paddle looks a little intimidating, so. You got to yell. Can somebody relay that? How do you motivate people to stay on the vision? Thank you very much. That's the power of those monthly reports. In the church council meeting, you report on the progress all the time, and nothing else is, well, it's not that nothing else is discussed, but that becomes the key focus of your discussion. So if you're doing that month after month after month, you're staying on point. So often what we do is we create a vision, we create a strategy. Some people go off here like they're a little special envoy to the vision, and they do their work over here, and then we never hear what's happening. But if you bring back the work and find ways for the congregation to be involved in it, that helps you stay on vision. And then I, as the pastor, I preach about it, and I use it as examples in sermons and everything else. So you've got to figure out where your communication process is working, and you and I can talk later, because right now there is this like awesome gospel music that's going to start, and it's better than me. So hey, can we give them a hand?